AP EURO LEQ, long essay question. Despite its intimidating title, what this is are the old FRQs basically broken in half, giving you the opportunity to choose from one time period or another, basically explaining the same thing historically. And despite the seemingly complicated task, cause, course of events, consequences. Now you only have 35 minutes and it is worth 15%. Make sure you become thoroughly conversant with all the instructions associated with the LEQ. Those can be relatively easily found on the College Board website. I'm sure your teachers have gone over it with you and we'll discuss it at length. 3 main tasks that you're expected to do for the LEQ. Recall, select, and deploy appropriate historical knowledge, and you need to communicate that effectively. And that is essentially going to be a 5-paragraph response, maybe more. It's going to have an introduction and a thesis, which you'll write last. You will end in a conclusion, whereby the first sentence will be a restatement of your thesis statement. And then you'll work toward synthesis in the conclusion. Not listing facts, not listing evidence that you've already stated up above, but bringing together, merging the analysis, the value added that you put on the evidence you chose to select and deploy in the paragraphs above. So the key, essentially, is to come to a judgment, is to reach that point of synthesis. Now you're going to try your very best to use all those historical skills that you've been working on all year and try to put some polish on a response that's going to address specifically the prompt. And ideally, what you'd like to try to do is talk about interpretation, your interpretation, but historical interpretation. It would be good if you have, perhaps, another author, another perspective that you can bring into it as a means of analytical comparison. First things first, answer the question asked. And how do we do that? We make sure we deconstruct the question. And this is time well spent. You don't skim the question. You make sure you deconstruct it, take it apart. Find the instruction, the command word. What specifically is the task I have to address? The given factor, the concept, the topic, the subject of the question itself, its focus, and the time period that we're talking about. And again, the basic framework is C3, cause, course of events, and consequences. Here are an example of some command words, the instruction, and essentially what you're supposed to do. And I know we know them and I know we're familiar with them, but it's good to go over them and make sure you know exactly how to respond to those particular command words. And the given factor. Okay, the given factor is pretty important. It's going to highlight a historical event. Ideally, you know everything there is to know about that historical event. Then it becomes a matter of just simply selecting what's going to be relevant and important in responding to the prompt. The focus, this is the implicit guidance of the question. And sometimes it's a little bit hard to discern when we're under time pressure and we're deconstructing the prompt, but it is essential. This shapes your analysis. This is how they want you to answer the question. This is how they want you to analyze the evidence that you're going to deploy and use to substantiate your thesis. And the time period, well, this is contextualization. This is understanding what's going on at that particular time. This is putting the event in a particular era. This is understanding the event in terms of, as it says here, the zeitgeist, the cultural milieu, what is actually happening in Europe in that particular place at that time. So you can do some comparison. And your body paragraphs, again, maybe 4 to 6 evidence paragraphs. Paragraph doesn't have to be any more than 4 lines. Could be 3, could be 5, but 4 to 6 paragraphs. It's best to stick with 3. 3 main points that you're going to address concerning supporting your thesis statement and responding directly to the prompt. And as I said before, LEQs are FRQs, basically broken in half. So for instance, look at this one from the 2004 exam, right? Compare and contrast the extent to which the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution changed the status of women. Now we would of course spend some time deconstructing that prompt, but this is possible for future AP EURO LEQs. Analyze the extent to which the French Revolution changed the status of women. Analyze the extent to which the Russian Revolution changed the status of women. And that's essentially what I think they're going to do. I don't know if they're going to regurgitate old questions and simply do this, but that's essentially what the LEQs are set up. So essentially the College Board is telling you we're making this task easier for you to approach. You have basically the same time period, time to respond. And what follows are some guidance, implicit guidance as to what you should be doing or what the readers will be looking for when they read your response. So take the time to stop and think about that and let this help you through your revision, through your preparation for the exam. And again, you can read down through this all by yourself, but it would be good for you to try to use this as something of a checklist. Synopticity is a term we're going to talk about next. Approaching history in the way a professional historian would. You want to draw together all the knowledge you can, all the ideas that are relevant, and the arguments to show overall historical understanding. Now, the extent to which you are familiar with the prompt will determine the extent to which you're able to apply what we call historiography, other insights and interpretations from other historians, other viewpoints. But you want to try to consider that your response will be from an amateur historian. And you are the historian responding and answering that prompt. And you want to think of it on that level. And it's got to be relatively deep. Can't be superficial. Got to make sure you come up with judgments. Got to have a clear driving thesis that establishes, maintains, and then wins the argument. Now, this is specific advice from College Board AP EURO readers. And just read down through here. Make sure you know exactly what they're looking for. I'm sure you've seen something like this before, but it's really important that you are inside the mind of the person who's going to read your response so that you can, in your mind, have a checklist to guide you through the response. Okay, and this is just some specific information concerning one prompt that was provided in the College Board guidance for the 2016 redesign. And here, this is basically an FRQ broken in half. It's essentially what it is. You can see they are the same question. They are just using two different time periods. Revolutions of 1848, the turning point that didn't turn, and the collapse of communism. You know, which one are you going to choose? Well, you're clearly going to choose the one that you have in your mind initially when you see what this question is about through your deconstruction, and that will be the one you will choose. And you'll begin to make some notes accordingly and try to consider, how will my paragraphs be shaped and formed in my response. And these are the guidance they're the rules. They are the rules by which your response will be read in order to award points. So if you're fully aware of the rules, you have that as a checklist in your mind, then the opportunity in 35 minutes to actually proofread is a bit sketchy. But while you're writing, while you're thinking, have I covered every point I need to with comparison, causation, etc.? And then concerning the revolutions of 1848, I just provided you here a very brief outline of C3. Causes, course of events, consequences. Okay? The turning point that didn't turn. That essentially could be a thesis statement as well. Change in continuity over time, making sure you understand this in a particular period of historical development. You can see, again, this is all opportunistic. It's not restrictive, it's not exclusive, it is inclusive and opportunistic, and that's how you probably ought to approach this. What can I include? And again, you are awarded points. Points are never taken away. You start out with nothing. You start out with nothing, and you can only gain points. Argumentation, got to have a thesis statement. Thesis statement must not be a restatement of the prompt. Thesis statement is going to be written last. Your introduction is going to be written last as well, to make sure that you are going to introduce what you actually wrote. And your thesis statement is going to be after you've pondered and thought and written and developed a conclusion. And then that thesis statement will speak exactly toward what you actually have provided. Okay, and supporting the argument, have to have evidence, got to be evidence that's going to be meaningful and relevant and support your thesis. And synthesis. Well, synthesis is basically taking the value added, your analysis that you put onto that evidence in support of your thesis statement, and if you must, simply restate it, point of analysis by point of analysis in your conclusion. Hopefully by that particular juncture, after 3 or 4 paragraphs that you've written, developing that base of evidence in support of a thesis statement, hopefully by that time you can merge those together, kind of weave a nice tapestry of synthesis. And the main important point, explain historical explanations and reach a judgment. Okay, decode the question first, plan your answer briefly, answer directly, specifically, and make sure, even if you're not 100% accurate in the evidence that you've deployed, you take those analytical skills and you make it fit. Okay, you make it fit. Well-constructed paragraphs, I think it's probably best to start out with the weakest evidence first, giving that hint that you're going to address the other side of the argument, which you really are not, and then work your way forward to the strongest evidence toward the conclusion, because that is the way, of course, it will be read. The first thing they're going to look for is your thesis statement. Then they're going to read and try to identify key words. So this is where dates, book titles, documents, people's names, events, you have to write these out clearly. You can't faff about writing in general. You must be specific. And if you need any further assistance, email me.